Hey everybody, today we're going to work on closures in Swift. So this is meant to be like an intro kind of thing. Like when I started, I would go through and read things on closures and it seems really complicated. So my goal is to kind of boil it down to its simplest parts in this video. And at the end I'll provide some external resources so you can learn more in-depth stuff. But starting off with the in-depth stuff really kind of threw me for a loop. So what we're going to do is just show you about what a closure is and why it's useful in a code base and what you're going to see in the wild more like. So we're going to start off just talking about like what is a closure. Now, simply put, a closure is a variable that holds code, and we're going to be using this playground. If you want to open up your playgrounds and play along, that would be great. That'd be the best way generally to learn this. But yeah, a closure is a variable that holds code. There. So it's kind of like why say it like that? It's a function as a variable. That's what it is. I'll even add that. Just maybe it'll be easier to understand that way. Now, let's do it at its simplest form using type inference here. When you declare a variable and you put it as a string, if you just say string equals string, it automatically knows that we're looking at a string, and it's not because I said string right here. I could say var string. Maybe that'd be better. But it knows that this is a string. If I option click it, it says string. So this will naturally know that this is a closure. So we're going to say var closure var, and then we're just going to write a function on the other side of this equals sign. And in here we're just going to print, this is a function inside a variable. And that's, this is a closure. If we control click or option click right here, it says closure var, and then it shows the syntax of a closure, which we're going to get to in a second. And the way to call this is just like calling a function. Closure bar. And let's play and make sure we're getting the right thing here. And down here we'll see this is a function inside a variable. So it is printing properly, but you guys probably haven't seen it set up exactly like this in the wild, and it's generally not. The way you're going to see it more often is in its standard syntax, which is right here. I pulled it from the Swift documentation, which I'll leave a link to, and where you see it's parameters and then the arrow to the return type, and then you use the keyword in, and then in the next line you're going to write your statements. And so it's set up really like a function. If at its most basic form, the easiest way to write it is to say like parentheses arrow parentheses. That is a closure. It's not a it's not a full function. We have to attach something to it, but that is the simplest way to do it. We're going to, in this example, write something that converts a string to an integer, and it is a closure. So I'm going to say let string to int, and again it's going to be a variable that holds this closure. But we're going to declare the type because we have parameters and we have a return type. And see in this, we have parameters and the return type, and we're going to set it up as so. So the parameter is going to be the string, return type is going to be an integer. So string arrow integer. And so now we're ready to actually write the function. And oh, we have a little error here. I might have expected it, but it says contextual type for closure expects one argument, which can't be ignored. So it's going to say underscore n, but we actually want to do something with this, so we're going to give it a name. And you can either put it in parentheses or not. If it's a tuple, you can use tuples as arguments. That's gets a little crazy, but for now we're gonna call it input string in, and then in the closure. So it's just like using a function parameter, you know. So we're gonna say input string as an ns string, because we have to get the integer value out of it. And now that we've done that, all the error messages go away. Technically, we would be returning this, but because of closures, if you write just one line, you don't need to use the return keyword. You know, you can either leave it or it's up to you. It's going to perform the same way either way. So let's break down what we have here. We have the variable, or a constant in this case, called string to int, and it is of type closure with input of string and output of integer. Input string is the name of the variable, so it'd be like in a normal function saying input string, right? So that's exactly what we're doing here. And then in order to call this, we'd have to put our input string, we have to give it something. So we're going to say string to int, and then in here it's going to be asking for a string. And no, it's not. Yeah. So in here it's going to be asking for a string, and we're going to give it a string of 83. Just give it a number. And let's run it here, see what happens. As you can see, it's returned an integer 83. So yeah, that was a basic implementation of a closure in its formal syntax. So hopefully you have a better understanding of the syntax, because we're going to go on to the most popular implementation of closures, and that's as parameters within functions. Now, why would you use this as a parameter instead of you know, just using a variable or something like that? I mean, this could definitely be done in a different way that is also faster. This is just an example. Why would we set things up this way? And the reason is because if you just put on your conceptual hat, if you have something in your model, for example, and you want to call it in the view controller, and there's certain functionality that you want separation of powers. You want something in the model to be decoupled. You want something to happen in the view controller when something inside the model happens. And you can use, you know, there's a million ways to solve problems in software. You could use delegates, protocols, stuff like that, but you don't want to link up your model view controller in that. Well, you can. Again, a million ways to do it. But the way you're going to see it in the wild is as parameters in functions, for that reason of decoupling things. So let's use something that I've seen in my work in multiple code bases of big time companies, and we're going to use network calls. And these network calls are going to have different closures that are performed whether the call succeeds or whether it fails. And it's going to be set up like this, network call. And instead, we're going to be using did succeed as a Boolean instead of actually going to the network. Say success string. Void. So that is a closure, of course. And then I'm going to say failure. And that's because we want to pass in strings. Like when we call the function, you'll see we're gonna print something into the console, and we need this string parameter in order to do that. Okay, so we're gonna say did succeed is, I like to document things as I'm doing them, is a substitute for network call status. So, you know, we're gonna, if we say did succeed true, we want to print the success clause or the success function closure, and if it failed, we want to, you know, do the failure closure, of course. So we're gonna say if did succeed. So that naturally it means if it equals true, but you don't have to put that. I'm gonna say success, and the string is going to be call succeeded, and else we're going to say failure, and we're going to say call failed with error. And you know, if you want to put errors and everything in here, I mean, a proper networking layer is going to have different errors of feedback. You know, whatever you get from the network is going to print the error, and it'll tell you if it failed or not. But you know, this is just a basic function with closures as parameters in kind of a similar way you're going to see in real life. Now, in order to call this, we're just going to say network call, and we have all these parameters. So success, failure. So let's say true. We'll toggle it and test it out later. And see how I just did that? That was because I double clicked in the, just double click on the closure, or you can highlight it and press enter and it'll auto do this, you know, the same way. And we're going to pass result string. And so here what we're doing is the same thing we did up here, where we're saying result is the parameter that's coming from this that is essentially this. So in here we're going to print our result, which is the string parameter here. And then in here we're going to have an error, which would typically be like an error type, but it's going to be of string type here, just to simplify it a little bit. And we're going to print the error. Now, why it may be looking a little cryptic that, you know, this is a string passed to, it returns void, so maybe why wouldn't I use return a string instead of inputting a string? And that's just, it's really just a syntax thing. I mean, it is how it is, and that's how a lot of this stuff goes. But as you'll see right here, like we're calling a function here. It says success is a function as a variable, and in parentheses it is a string and it returns void, so it's going to return whatever we put in here. And if we were returning an integer, here it's going to ask, you know, you're going to have to return an integer for it to work properly. See, like it's not giving me any errors. If I take this away, it does. So, just, you know, just a little more conceptual stuff here. I'm going to move this back to void. And since this says did succeed true, hopefully what we're going to see is call succeeded printed in the bottom here, which is great. It says call succeeded. And if you look over here, it'll say return. So that's, you know, that's returning a function with no return type. So that's just an empty parentheses is a good sign here. And as you'll see, if I put in false here, and I run it again, it's going to say call failed with error. And like I said, most of the time, your API endpoint is going to send you an error back, like 404, whatever, and then a description. The last thing I'm going to get to is the syntax right here. If you didn't notice, the network call, the parentheses, they end right here. And it's kind of a weird syntax thing about closures in Swift. And also, it says success, add a colon to indicate that it is a parameter. And there's no one that says failure. So it's called a trailing closure in Swift. And essentially all trailing closure is the last closure as a parameter in a function. So if you have, if this was success and then success was something, like if there was like 5 different closures, it would always be the last one that trails like that. And it's just really just like syntactic sugar in Swift. So it's just, but it's something you're going to see a lot. So you might as well learn it right here. So in order to do it, we're going to give our own little example here. We're going to say closure method, and now we're making it a closure as a function, or as a parameter in a function, just by itself. That top one was a little more complicated. I'm just going to say closure parameter, which is exactly what it is. And it's just going to be of the syntax that we looked at before, where parameter is nothing, return type nothing, so we say void. And then when we call it, we're going to put in the statements there. Now, let's say print func. I almost got weird. Jeez, function performed. If y'all are aware, I do this like full time, and I've been working from home, and I've been working a lot. When you work from home, it's easy to just sit here and be on your computer with the with the virus and everything. But let's avoid that. We're just here to learn about Swift, guys. Not here to talk about viruses. And the closure method, we're going to call it without a trailing closure, and then we're going to call it with a trailing closure. So we're going to say closure method, and naturally it's going to give us a trailing closure. So that's just, we don't have to do anything in here. We're already calling this just by doing. We're calling it, and you'll see if we run it, it'll print function performed down at the bottom. So the other way that is the non-trailing closure method is we're going to have to write it out without the autofill. So then we're going to pass in closure parameter, and then if we hit enter, it's going to do it again. So it depends on how your code base is set up. If everybody writes closures with the parentheses at the end, you're going to want to do it that way. The quickest way to do that is to just highlight that and then just put brackets and then hit enter, and there you go. This is how you set up a closure, a trailing closure that is not a trailing closure. And they both work. They both do the exact same thing, and you'll see if we run it here, it'll print function performed twice. So, as you can see, it's really a syntactical thing, but also it's a little bit easier. It's not, everything's not like lined up and spaced perfectly for, anybody that's coming from Python that's like a super like space control freak. Which, it looks really neat when it's all organized like that, but Swift is not necessarily meant for that. I don't really know the meaning behind doing a trailing closure versus not trailing. But if it's just a single parameter, see how much, it's a little bit nicer. And you know what you're doing in here if you're familiar with the closure. Now, sometimes you want to say the parameter, and then you want to set it up this way if you're building them yourself. But if you're building closures yourself, I do have some other resources. If you want to check out There's some articles by Johnson Dell. There's another one that's a video from Let's Build That App, and that's a really good thing on writing closures a little more in depth. And you can also read the Swift documentation on it, which I said I was going to link. All three of those will be linked in the description, and also if you want to download this. So I hope I tried to explain it in the best way possible. Hopefully you guys are getting it. If not, let me know how it could be improved in the comments, because this was a really tough concept for me in the beginning, and I really want everyone to understand this. So let me know how it's going for you, and stay safe out there.